On this week's episode of 90 Degrees, we are joined by Ed Feng, power ranker of college basketball, college football, and NFL. You can find Ed on Twitter at the Power Rank. You can also find his work online at thepowerrank.com. And while you're there, please be sure to check out his blog. Today we're talking about March Madness edges and the use of power ratings. Let's dive in to the sharp side and look for the right angles in sports betting.
Big bomb bangers, boogie down.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jews and
Big
Gentiles,
bangers,
sharps and squares, welcome back to episode 20 of 90 Degrees, where we discuss the right sports betting angles. I'm your host, Kevin Davis, and today we're bringing on the legendary Ed Feng, who has a PhD in sports betting as well as chemical engineering. But before we bring on Ed, we have a special announcement to make. The podcast has a sponsor, our first ever sponsor, Pinnacle Sportsbook. Pinnacle is the world's sharpest sportsbook and is now available in Ontario. Find out what professional bettors have known for decades. Pinnacle is where the bettors play, taking sharp action every day. No limits, low synthetic hold, and a must have for those with a top down approach. Must be 19 plus in Ontario. Please play responsibly. Not available in the US. Ed, thanks for coming on the podcast. You cover a lot of different sports. Just give us like a brief background on your specialty in the sports betting space.
Right, Kevin, thanks so much for having me on. The primary thing I do over at the Power Rank is predictive analytics for football betting. It all started over a decade ago when I got myself kicked out of academia and was looking for something else to do with my time. I always loved sports, and some of my math background ended up being a really good basis for thinking about how to adjust for strength of schedule. So I worked out some of the details of an algorithm. It essentially adjusts for strength of schedule. This is obviously really important in college football, where the SEC and the Sun Belt play vastly different strengths of schedule. So I found it to be a useful thing in all sports. I know it gives me an edge in the NFL as well, even though we kind of don't think about that quite as much in pro football. And in one of the early years, I was talking to some people who were advising me about where to go with this algorithm and the predictions that it makes. And they said, "Oh, you should do March Madness." And I was like, I'm not going to do that. You know, Ken Palmer always got that covered. He's been doing it for so long. Like literally, this was 12 years ago, right? So not much has changed there in terms of college basketball analytics. Everyone still goes over to his site. But this advisor friend told me you have to do college basketball because the tournament is so big. And I was like, okay, that sounds good. Because I've been a big college basketball fan. I love March Madness, just like all of us do, and filling out brackets. And so I ran the algorithm, and it's done pretty well over the years. The whole notion of adjusting for strength of schedule is really important in college basketball as well, as you're trying to figure out, how to rate a team like Gonzaga, who plays in the West Coast Conference, compared to an Alabama, who plays in a very tough SEC this year. So it's useful. My methods have really evolved over the past decade. Things change every year, as you well know, Kevin, in sports, and you have to adjust. And sometimes you have multiple models running, and sometimes one model works last year, and then it kind of sucks right now. So these types of things happen. But I hope as a predictive analytics person, I'm always trying to evolve. I'm always trying to get better. And most of my year is spent on football, but I really do enjoy engaging in March Madness right now. And I'm not, Ken still has the space kind of on lockdown in a lot of ways. And the way I've kind of negotiated that is just to become the person that people go to for how to win your bracket. How to win your March Madness pool. So how to fill your bracket out in a way that maximizes your odds. And this is really cool because it involves analytics, but it's not just analytics. You need a little bit of strategy as well. And I'd be happy to talk about that today.
Yeah, definitely. That's, a primary reason we brought you on. This is coming out right before March Madness. As of the day we're recording this, we don't know the brackets, but we will know pretty soon. Now, like one thing I've noticed with Ken Palm is the actual game by game projections are very close to the spread. But
Sure.
if you take their numbers, build a simulation for these conference tournaments, there are some values to be found. So part of it is the numbers are out there, but if you do certain things with the numbers that are out there, you can find bets that other people aren't finding. Um, what sort of like under the radar futures are game by game bets can bettors look for that aren't publicly posted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's particularly an important question right now because every March, I just feel like college basketball spreads are so sharp. That's a very different story in November and December, where it's been known for a long time that that's a pretty good place to hit the sports books because they're focusing a lot of their attention on football as they need to do. There's probably a lot of value in spreads. I think right now, uh, if you're going to bet a college basketball game, probably better to try to come up with an angle on the total. That's going to be a little bit easier to do. So there's that. Kevin, what you mentioned in terms of looking at conference tournament win probabilities, I think that is something that is a very good idea to do. I had Andy Molitor on my podcast, and he talks a lot about that. He tries to break down some of those smaller conference tournaments, trying to find value there. I certainly think that's a good idea because it's just not as well plowed an area. I feel like if you do have some quantitative skills, you can just get Ken Palm's numbers, or actually my best numbers are for free. I have them still for free on my site right now. That's not going to be the case on Monday morning, but you can just go grab my numbers for all 363 teams, and the model that I'm trusting most right now is actually the air metrics have been better than the opening line over the last month. So I feel pretty good about where those numbers
All
are.
right.
So, yeah, and then futures. I think I haven't bet a ton of futures. I did grab Houston 8-1 a couple weeks ago. That was something I had in my newsletter. I can't get that number anymore. We'll talk about Houston because they're the favorite, and I believe they should be.
My
And
numbers like them too, so that makes me feel better.
yeah, no, for sure, and I think they check a lot. They check a lot of boxes when you think about basketball. When you think about uh, you know characteristics of team that tend to win the tournament, I think they check a lot of boxes. But we should talk about that in a little bit. I feel like I don't know. As I say this, like I feel like you should probably stay away from spreads. Um, that being said, I'm probably going to have a spread in my newsletter tomorrow. It's kind of what I'm thinking. Obviously, we don't know. There's no market up right now, and they're going to come up pretty late just with the structure of conference tournaments. But they are pretty sharp right now, so you better be pretty sure of your angle before you bet a spread. Probably better to look at a future or a total.
I mean, part of what I found with these conference championships is you just got to look at the rules for each one. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so many conferences where getting those buys are important. So you may have a long shot, but they have more games to win. And not only that, but they're playing on less and less rest as they get towards the final.
Yep,
So a lot of what I see are so many terrible bets on long shots and an occasional gem of like a 1, 2, or 3 seed, sometimes a 4 seed,
interesting.
depending on the conference.
Yeah, for sure. But then we've also seen Purdue is coming in on a bye today, and the market just moved 2 points against them towards Rutgers today too, which is interesting too. Purdue's another interesting team that I'm happy to get into as well. But yeah, I agree. Like rest matters, and I think it's important to consider that, right? Because there's always these kind of examples of teams that make these like very long runs and are very good on short rest. I remember a Connecticut team back in the day did that, but
The Kemba Walker team, right?
the Kemba Walker team, exactly what, six straight or whatever? No, six seems like too many, but it was probably like five when
I
that
think it may have
conference
been
was
4 or
bigger.
5, but they did that, and then they were a 4 seed in the tournament, and
Right.
then they won the big dance.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they went all the way. So
That was the
yeah,
first time I ever placed in an NCAA pool.
Nice.
I mean, because before that, it'd just be my dad's office pool. I put in an entry, wouldn't read sharp material. Kemba Walker year, I didn't read sharp material, but I put it in and I got it. And
Awesome.
then once I discover like the sports betting and the game theory of tournament entries, I realize okay, you have 0% vig, and you have people that aren't using right strategy. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of opportunities found there. One thing I do is I just go on Twitter and I search for people looking for people to enter their March Madness pool, and I'll just DM them,
Mm,
being like, "Hey, how many entries can I get in? How many people are in?"
that's brilliant. I love that. Right. And you can actually kind of like micromanage that too to try to figure out where in the country those particular people are from. Right. So if you think a team is overrated, then you're really looking to get into a pool. Like, let's just say, for example, you think, I don't know, let's
Yeah,
say
because
you think
last year I was in a North Carolina pool.
right,
That didn't go so well,
right.
but I was on the right warpath. It's about the
No, you
process, not the result.
You were completely right about that North Carolina team. I thought they absolutely overachieved, almost won the entire thing. And last year, I was pretty critical of North Carolina making Hubert Davis the coach, someone who's never had head coaching experience. And of course, you look like an idiot as they go all the way to the title game. And yeah, they lost yesterday, so it looks like they're out. And I mean, the true talent of that team. It's not a bad basketball team, but you kind of got to look over 2 seasons. You average the results of almost winning a tournament and not making the tournament, and they're probably somewhere. I don't know where my numbers have. I'm probably somewhere between 25 and 35.
Yeah, I mean, and then going back to the subject of like going for March Madness pools on Twitter, like it's just amazing all the people that I assume read my bio on Twitter and checked my tweets and had no problem with me entering the pool.
Right.
And then the great part is because I did poorly in the pools last year, they probably won't mind if I hit them up again to join.
Exactly. Right. Probably had a lot of Gonzaga
But
winners there, which
I'm satisfied with my performance. I'm satisfied with my performance, even though it was all losing, because all the losers were at the bottom. I'd rather be at the bottom than the middle. So bottom or
sure.
top.
Right. Exactly.
Go big or go home.
Yeah.
And you can speak more about this, but like the big mistake I see everybody making is, if you're going to go for that popular March Madness team, you got to pick some, big upsets early on. And if you're going for a long shot or a team that isn't so popular, you go safer for the beginning rounds. And of course, I look for unique rules.
Right. Right. I mean, I tend to. You're absolutely right. If you're in a bigger pool, so let's say like bigger than 30, uh, and I also recommend not getting in a pool bigger than 100, just because your odds to win kind of decrease exponentially, and 100 is a pretty big number, and it just leaves a lot of room open for someone to get lucky and beat you. So the smaller the better. But if you are in a pool with between the sizes of 30 and 100, you have to take some risks, right? You're not just going to pick the team that has the most likely chance to win. You need to figure out what team other people are picking, and you can actually get this data from sites like ESPN that just publish data on millions of brackets. It's actually a pretty big question as to who that team is going to be this year, and we should get into that in a little bit. But you want to pick a different team that has a good win probability. That's not the favorite, but has a chance to win it anyway. And so the primary example in recent years is Virginia. In 2019, it was a year where Duke was the
It's
favorite,
another winner for
and
me.
awesome. Duke was the favorite and had a dominant team with Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett. Of course, Zion blows out his shoe towards the end of the season. He's hurt, and there's all kinds of questions about whether he can play. But he came back in the ACC tournament, played really well, and they were clearly the favorite. And if I remember right, they had about a 1 in 3 chance of winning the tournament. Like, that's favorite territory, not 1/2, 1/3, and no team's
But I
going to
believe
get
they
there.
had like one half of the entries or something close like that.
Yeah, it was a little bit less than that, but yeah, I mean, it was certainly a thing where you wanted to fade Duke. and the team to do that last year was Virginia. And there was a couple of factors going on there. The first of which was that Virginia was the top overall seed the year before and then lost to a 16. So that was certainly playing in the minds of a lot of people. The same team that lost to a 16 seed was essentially the same team that won the national title a year later. Tony Bennett's best team, certainly the best team on offense. They had a lot of shooters, and it wasn't easy, but they got it done, and they won the entire thing. So that's really when I talk about being contrarian in your March Madness pool, that's what I'm talking about. Pick a team to win that you guess or know that a lot of other people in your pool are not picking. Pick against them and pick another team like Virginia that year that had a pretty good win probability. Because that way you get those 32 points. Like if that team wins, you get the 32 points that a lot of other people don't. And then some, using Kevin's numbers in the previous rounds should get you through. Just using, smart, solid chalk in the earlier rounds is gonna help you win.
Yeah, I mean, I think people sometimes say, okay, I need to pick, this number of 12 seeds to beat a 5 seed and this number of 13 seeds to win, rather than looking at each game individually in its own box. Because I think the reason a lot of these so-called upsets happen is, the people who make the brackets, aren't the sharpest in the world. Right. Like if we actually got some real college basketball bettors to make the brackets, it would be much different. And that would be interesting. So I don't know if the NCAA will ever go for that. I know they're allegedly anti-gambling, but they make all their money off people watching because of gambling. But that's certainly something that should be looked into.
Right, for sure. I mean, the people that make the field are not the sharpest. You and I could certainly do a better job. But I will point out, Kevin, that I do feel like they're doing a lot better than they did a decade ago. When I first started doing this with the numbers, I mean, it was a lot worse. I mean, there were often legitimately be 12, 11 seeds with a higher win probability than the 5 or 6 that they were playing. So that's certainly the evolution of analytics. Like I do feel like the community is using analytics. I think Ken Pomeroy has told me that he does not use any preseason prior in his numbers right now, partially because he wants kind of an unbiased view of this year in terms of how they performed, even though putting a little bit of preseason prior probably makes it a little more predictive, even at this point of the season. So yeah, anyways, like the committee is using analytics. I mean, they're not good, but they're better than they used to be. So, and I think that's like, I mean, even more so, I tend to go with chalk in the earlier rounds now, unless you really have a good reason to not.
Unless you have a big pool.
Yeah, unless you have a big pool, or more, I was thinking like if you have one of these pools where you get like upset points in the first round, right? You get like the seed difference for picking in the first round games. Then you got to go in and do some math and figure out what the highest expected value.
You just have to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, stuff like that. I mean, I feel like that's like a second order thing. You just, right? Like, you need to figure out if you're going to pick the upset, are you expected to get more points than if you pick the favorite? Because the favorite's going to have higher than 50% chance to win. If there were no upset points, you clearly pick that team, right? Or at least I would suggest that you pick that team. I'm not a big fan, Kevin, of sweating over these like upset picks in the first round. Because, if you're in a pool that's only worth 1 point, it's really not worth it. Right? Like focus your attention on the later rounds where more of the points are.
Yeah, because if you're picking a team that 12% pick, you're competing against that 12%. So you got to think within that 12%, which ones are taking big risks and which ones are taking small risks. And then work from there.
Right.
So if it's an 80-person pool, 12%, that'd be like 9 people. So you got to think, okay, the 9 people who have Virginia, how do I beat those 8 other people?
Right.
Rather than think.
And chalk's going to help you there.
Or if you're like really sold, if you're really sold on the team that 35% of people are picking, then you got to take some risks. It's great with, the ESPN March Madness data, I feel like lines up even to the non-ESPN pools. just because so many people enter in ESPN
Mhm.
entries.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what the number is, but I mean, in the past, it's at least been 5 million people. So you're going to get some pretty good statistics there. And from just kind of anecdotal evidence from me asking about people's pools, like if you're getting a pool that's like between 50 and 100 people, it's going to reflect what's on ESPN just because you're getting that bigger sample size. That might not be true for a 10-person pool where everyone bets on college basketball for a living and is sharp, right? That might not reflect ESPN statistics. But if you're in kind of a typical March Madness pool, and there's up towards 100 people, you're going to reflect what you see on ESPN.com.
Now, you brought up earlier about how you don't want to join a pool of over 100. But I can think of a counterpoint is that you essentially have zero VIG, and all these people out there love playing these same game parlay lottery picks that have a 40% house edge. For that crowd that likes the SGPs or the plus 300 futures, which other than the one I hit with Northern Illinois last year, are usually a bad bet to do. For the thrill seekers out there, with the right strategy, isn't that something that they should look into? That rather than buying a lottery ticket or doing SGP, why not do a couple long shot entries of a 3 seed that only 2% of people are picking in a 100 plus person pool?
Yeah, for sure. I think that makes a ton of sense. I don't know if there's ever a world in which you should do too many SGPs, especially the ones that FanDuel will just have there for you to click the opening one. If you take that $20 and get in a pool that's bigger than 100, I'm okay with that. And also you have to look at how many kind of the payout structure too. Like if you have a bigger pool, there's probably more than one winner, which is definitely what you're looking for. That's obviously increasing your odds of cashing. And yeah, I mean, you can definitely play. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea. I think it's just important to realize you're not going to win every year. So if you're going to do that every year and have fun with it, I think in the long run it is definitely plus EV. Just if you're looking if you really want the thrill of winning this year, that's not the best way to go about it.
I mean, it's all relative. But I've never really. It's really hard to find those 100 plus person pools.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you work at a huge company that has a March Madness pool, is
Right.
what I found.
So a lot of these people on Twitter asking for people into their pools, they tend to be smaller.
Yeah, they tend to be like 20 or 30 people.
God, that's perfect. That's such a great strategy. I
And
really
what I
like that.
noticed is they're concentrated in like an area of the country. So I was in the North Carolina pool. I'm trying to remember some of the other places. There was the one in Washington State.
Okay.
Um, Surprisingly, the Washington State one, people weren't picking Gonzaga last year. I thought they would be.
Interesting.
Maybe they're Seattle based
Yeah.
because
It's always
Gonzaga
different when you
is,
go over the mountains.
but it's not like Gonzaga is like a huge university or in a highly
Right.
populated area.
Right.
But usually making the assumptions, doing your own profiling of the other contestants.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very important, right? If you're in a pool in Lawrence, Kansas, which actually might be a pretty good idea given Bill Self's health right now. He was not on the
Oh,
sideline yesterday. And I do think that matters. Maybe not a ton, but at least a little bit. Um, there's going to be a lot of people that pick Kansas to win in that pool, no matter what's going on nationally, right? So that's an opportunity to fade Kansas. Unfortunately, Michigan is not going to be in the tournament this year, but in past years, I live here in Ann Arbor. If you were in a pool in Ann Arbor, at least half the people are picking Michigan, at least. And so
and
those
how
are
many are
those are
picking Ohio State?
yeah, like none, right? So those are the type of opportunities that you want to take advantage of, and it's like a good time to get on Twitter and check out what kind of pools are out there.
Or whatever chatter is out there. In terms of like these future bets, I find really good value on the 2 team bets where you pick which team advances further.
Okay, yeah,
I find a lot in that. I find the exotic bets like how many 2 seeds make it to the final four. Last year I was sweating because I had 0 number 1 seeds to make it to the final four, and also had one.
Right.
But the
Yeah.
0-1 was like a huge payout.
Oh, yeah, that's a bummer because Kansas snuck in there, right? Yeah. That's fun. I've actually never looked at these exotic type bets because usually in those 4 days leading, usually in the time before the tournament starts, I'm pretty busy with bracket advice and stuff on the site. But I will certainly check that out. I presume the big boys like are going to have those type of exotic bets, the DraftKings and the FanDuels of the world.
And not only that, but they usually have it like on Selection Sunday or early Monday morning.
Great. So yeah, so you jump on it then. Although that's probably not the most bet in market, right? So that's probably a market where there might be some value heading into Thursday morning, right?
It moves though.
It does?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I mean,
That's,
it's weird
that's
because like
people
I
like you,
got.
Kevin. You're messing it up for the rest of us.
I mean, I always think like, oh, I'm like a small fish. I'm not betting big enough amounts to move the market. But then, you know, I meet one sports book. I met him at Bet Bash, and they were like, "Congratulations on picking Virginia Tech to win the ACC." I'm like, "Oh, how do you know? Did you read my article?" He's like, "No, because when you made the bet, it popped up on our ticker." So, more and more sports books are profiling some of these lower level bettors that they see some sharp stuff with. So it may not be me individually, but if they say, okay, we got Kevin Davis, we got 2 people in Michigan, we got 1 person in Iowa, they're like, okay, we got to move it now. And even like this is somebody where because I was able to connect with him on Twitter, I built up some goodwill because it was college football and the total of this game was 54.5, and they did a market on margin of victory over under 54.5, and the under was plus 140. Which of course it's likely that the margin's going to be less than 54.5 if the total's 54.5. So rather than hit him up, I just sent him a message, be like, hey, you guys fucked up. You got to fix this.
That's very good of you, Kevin.
I
I might
mean,
have bet a little bit
that
first
that was just so easy. It
before I
felt
told
like
him.
theft.
Right. For sure. But I think with the way some of these public sports books are and the wide array of bets that they're offering, there's a lot of things that kind of feel like theft.
Yeah, and like if it's because I guess I learned a lesson from Croton on Hudson where I grew up. My friend ran an antique store, so she would go to a lot of auctions and buy stuff, and she said that the rule of thumb is it's not ethical to buy something for less than 50% of what it's worth. So if something's worth 100 and they're offering it for $10 at a tag sale, you got to tell them up front that it's worth more and I got to pay $50.
Interesting. They're not, I don't believe everyone in the world would agree with that approach to antiques, but I appreciate that someone does.
I mean, ultimately, it's like that kindergarten thing: treat people the way you want to be treated.
For sure,
But at a
for
certain
sure.
point,
But
some of these sports books are scum, and they limit winners
right,
too quickly for following the
yep,
rules. That you should hit them up. But
exactly.
if it's a sports book like Pinnacle Sportsbook that has a
Right,
record of being good for the customer, I think
right.
it's good to just let them know.
Oh, for sure. I would
But
completely agree with that statement.
something if I give something a 40% probability of happening, and most sports books have it at plus 150, and one sports book has it at plus 200, I don't have to let them know
Sure.
because that's not a mistake. They're just having a difference of opinion.
Right. And they're off, and that's the whole point of sports betting is to find those bets.
Now, do you know of any like sports book managers that look at your numbers to kind of like adjust it, or do they just wait for the betting action?
I would suspect that they're waiting for the betting action. I mean, I don't know this for sure. I mean, look, the sports books certainly have a subscription to Ken Palm, right? There's no doubt about that. They have to know exactly where he is. And they probably have subscriptions to Right Angle Sports and Dr. Bob, right? because they need to know where that action is coming from. Bob's having a really good season. It's been interesting watching how the markets move when he releases. I would speculate that they have my numbers, but I'm not sure. Like, I mean, like the Power Rank is a good site, but it's certainly not the most famous site in the world out there for either football or college basketball. And my college basketball stuff is lower profile until we get to March. So, would I recommend that books look at my numbers? Of course, I would, but I don't think. I think in general, it's not the most high profile thing. So I wouldn't be shocked if no one was.
Now, like one thing interesting that comes up with you that I never really hear anyone ask in sports betting politics is your background in education. And I found an article you wrote on teaching kindergarteners math through blackjack.
Right.
Now, do the parents ever have an issue with you teaching them about gambling early on, or do they just chalk it up to a bunch of fun and they're glad their children are learning math through blackjack?
Most of the parents, I know, I've never gotten a complaint. Blackjack in kindergarten is a remarkable thing because, anything that's kind of fun, like a game that doesn't remind the child that they're actually doing math. So they're just like literally putting their finger on the cards. So you have 7, you have a 4, and they're literally counting, right, the spades or the diamonds or whatever they are. And so you are doing math in playing the game, and that's a really powerful thing. Like it's a really I feel like you should always learn by doing, and it's just an example of learning by doing, right? You're playing a game, you're not doing something more tedious like just like the
Filling out a
typical
worksheet.
Yeah, exactly. They're not filling out a worksheet. My younger son was really into blackjack. Actually, no. So we were playing poker, and that was another good example of when you're young, you're playing poker, and he actually didn't learn a ton from the poker. I mean, he was pretty good for it for a 7-year-old or however he was. But what was really powerful was to do the betting with the chips. Because if he's like, well, I want to bet like 23 cents on this, right? Like he'd have to count that out with the chips. And then he'd have to know like, oh, I need 2 10s and then, 3 1s and stuff like that. And that was a great tool for him. Now, when you get older with blackjack, with the middle school students, I would actually teach them how to count. And so that was fun. And that was something that you can imagine parents saying, hey, what's going on here? Why are you teaching my child gambling? And I never got that complaint. I think the answer is, well, it's kind of fun. And honestly, it's a really there's a lot of real life lessons there, right? I'm teaching you how to count cards. I'm teaching you that when there's a lot of 10s in there, like you need to bet more because you have an edge. And even though they did that, sometimes you lose, just like in real life, right? When you have that small edge, like it doesn't always happen. And I thought that was a really important lesson for the middle schoolers. Again, like learning by doing, and you're learning some math, you're learning about probability, and I think that's really powerful for a middle school student. I've had some parents come up to me after and say, like, the stuff that you did with my child really got them prepared for high school, and that alone is worth the time that you spend going in doing some math with middle school students. Overall, it was a really rewarding thing, and it was certainly fun to write about. And I again like learning by doing is so important.
Do you think there's room for a class in a university on sports betting, like an
Sure.
elective sports betting class? As long as the schools will panic, so you got to make it as long as they're 21 plus.
I
Because
certainly
they
think there's
freak
room
out
for it.
over the PointsBet Colorado agreement. Like, I'm glad that people are starting to freak out about certain responsible gambling things that are going on in the industry, but
Right.
they're freaking out about the wrong things.
Right, for sure. I do think there's room for a course. I think the question is like, what are you teaching that course? If you said I'm going to teach you quantitative methods for betting on sports, then for sure, right? Like no one's going to have an argument with that because you're actually teaching some math and data science, and those are all really good things. There are also a ton of elements of sports betting that have kind of nothing to do with that in terms of information. Um, and honestly, Kevin, like you don't teach like real world relationships ever in a class, like how you get real world relationships and go to things like Bet Bash and meet people and make these connections. Like you'll never learn that from a class, right? And that might be the most important thing for succeeding in the betting world. So I do think there's room for that. Is anyone doing it?
I mean, I don't think so. That's what I was saying. Like, what would you think about that? Because you got a
I
PhD, you can be an adjunct somewhere and teach the class.
I could be. Yeah. No, it's an interesting idea.
If I had a master's, I could teach it, but I don't.
You got a PhD in sports betting. That's all you got to show them, Kevin.
No, I only have a bachelor's in a, like not even in a quantitative field. But if I had like a master's in a different, it wouldn't matter because like I'm a practitioner.
Right, but I mean, you should learn from practitioners. Like, there's a lot of value in that, and I feel like the reason that colleges are kind of going downhill and having a lot of financial problems is that they're not doing things like that. They're in that old school way of saying like, "Hey, you need to do this calculus problem by hand," which no one does anymore in this world, right? It would be much better to be like, "Hey, why don't you go, as part of class, go solve this real world problem from someone that like a practice. It doesn't have to be sports betting; it can be anything, right?
I
Go
mean, I
work
never
on your
even took
problem."
calculus. I never even took pre-calc.
And
And
it has
then,
it held you back? Has the sports book ever been like, "Hey, can you solve this integral for me, and I'll give you $100"?
I mean, there's definitely a value in terms of, getting the thinking for some of these high level math courses. My brother has a master's in economics, so he's taking calculus to a high level. And sometimes he'll have some good insights. And then, of course, there'll be some things he missed because there's a lot of, sort of qualitative factors in addition to the quantitative. But, I think part of it is so many people are afraid of math or hate math because they don't apply it to anything. And if they started applying it to things in their life, then they would learn the material.
Exactly, and that's how you get a young child to get into math, right? You have to understand the child first, and then how math fits in her life. I mean, that's what I would do if I were tutoring. Um,
And then it's sequential. So if you have a bad teacher in math one year,
mhm,
you may have like not learned the material and you can't move on.
right. Yeah, that's for sure a problem. Yeah, I don't know. I like to kind of crap on calculus a lot. And it's not because I don't like calculus. I actually like calculus a lot. And I think it's a beautiful topic that we should all learn. But I just feel like it's overemphasized, right? Like if you want to talk legit about like what matters in the world today, in general, for any practitioner of of whatever we could call math or data science, yeah, sure, there's some calculus in there, but like there's a lot of things like linear regression and any kind of linear algebra and computer science and programming. There's a whole list of things I just think that are more important than calculus, but that's what we hammer home at the high school and college level, and it's just not consistent with what kids should be doing in 2023.
Yeah, it'd be great if like they could even spend like one day or one lesson just on if then statements.
Right?
Like, because that just opens up a
Yeah, or
huge can
whole
of worms.
exactly,
Or even like once you
exactly,
discover like that Monte Carlo models, the name itself sounds intimidating. But once you learn the basics, then your mind gets ticking and you can build them.
exactly,
Because
and
like
that's
I
really
had no
useful.
clue that Excel would randomly. I had no idea that Excel would randomly pick a number between 0 and 1, and then you could say, okay, this team has a 67% chance of winning. So you have it. So whenever the random number is less than 0.67, it selects the favorite. And whenever it's larger than that, it selects the underdog. So then it comes to the point of, okay, once you come up with the formula, you got to get good numbers to plug in.
There is like a wide swath of human knowledge in both the research world and the practical world that all start with picking a random number between 1 and 0. It's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. And then you see like other things that people are doing to like project things in other professional or even governmental organizations and think, oh, if they just, did a simulation, they can have like better numbers. Because I'm just thinking of like my local bike share program, City Bike. Um, their algorithm, I think, does a poor job of projecting when certain stations need more bikes and certain stations need more users to ride the bikes to open up spaces. Because they have a reward system to give people points to balance out the system. But I feel like the reward system is off. And once the system is off, they have to get someone in a truck to drive around, pick up bikes, and move them to empty stations. And I think, and this is like City Bike is owned by Lyft. So I'm thinking, how does Lyft not have a
Mhm.
better algorithm?
They should. They should be on the cusp of machine learning and predictions.
Although part of my theory of why they don't have a good algorithm is because they have it in their contract. You can't have any other competitors, and they're able to raise the rates 12% every year. So that's another tangent. Now, like March Madness this year, without the bracket being set, do you think we're going to have, a consensus favorite, or you just think you're going to have like a ton of different teams that are going to
Mhm.
be popular?
Right. I mean, the market's telling us who the favorite should be, and that's Houston, and I believe that to be correct. Your numbers say that. My numbers say that. A lot of other people's, yeah. I mean, they should be the favorite by a lot of metrics. The So what's interesting is there's who should be the favorite, and then who the public thinks should be the favorite. As we talked about in how to win your pool, right? Like that matters because there are certain pools where you want to pick against what the public is saying. And I think there's a big question out there whether Houston will be the public favorite. I actually talked to Evan Miyakawa about this yesterday. And, Houston is like Gonzaga. It's like not a team that's really well known. And you can imagine Alabama being a public favorite. Obviously, there's a lot of things going on with that program in terms of the potential legal status of star Brandon Miller.
I could see Kansas being one of the most overbet teams.
Exactly. So
They normally
Kansas,
look for the blue chips, and you don't have a Duke this year. You don't have a North Carolina. You don't have a Michigan. You don't have a Kentucky. I
yeah,
mean, I bet everyone's going to pick Kentucky to win the first round. You don't
mhm.
have. I'm just trying to think of some of the others. UCLA, maybe. UCLA may
Maybe.
be overbet. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean that'll be really interesting too.
Arizona.
hmm I feel like UCLA has kind of made a late surge in my numbers and a late surge on the basketball court, and with the brand recognition there, maybe are they the public favorite? I think that's certainly a possibility. I think when you think about winning your March Madness pool, like I'm really hoping for like kind of bad things to happen to Houston, like they lose, and like good things to happen to Kansas, like they win, and then all of a sudden Bill Self is no longer in the hospital, and everything's hunky dory there. Um, that's what I root for at this during championship week, right? Like I want kind of the teams that I really like to have a rough week this week. We'll see if that actually happens. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's huge questions about public favorite, and yeah, we talked about the teams that could potentially be that team.
Now, on the topic of Bill Self, our coaches in general, I've never like looked into how to quantifiably measure the impact of a coach.
Mm-hmm.
But qualitatively, I always thought that coaches were overrated because their most important contribution in college sports is recruiting the players
Mm-hmm.
and training them.
Right.
So if you have a coach out mid-season, they've already recruited the players and they've already trained them. So I wouldn't see much of a drop off with Kansas if they didn't have Bill Self, just because they already have the system in place and the cogs in the machine.
True. I mean, I think there might be a little bit of a
I mean, I think the bigger issue with them is the Big 12 is such a strong conference,
right.
and they perform well in
Right.
it.
I don't know. I mean, I do feel like I don't know. I personally think Bill Self gets a lot out of his players in March. That's just kind of anecdotal without any data to back it up. But so I think it matters a little bit. But in general, I agree with what you're saying. I did do a study one year about how coaches out or underperform expectations, either by the markets or by my numbers. And this was in the height of the Izzo is the greatest March Madness coach ever days. I think, I don't know, 2015, something like that. And, you know, I did the study because I wanted to figure out if that was actually true. And I think Izzo outperformed the market or his expectation, but it wasn't by a ton. And the coach that did the most was Roy Williams, which you can't really argue with, right? You know, he had kind of done well. You know, Izzo has kind of regressed in terms of that for the most part since then, you know, since those days where he was making, uh, or since those years where he was significantly outperforming what people expected in the tournament. One of the coaches at the very bottom was Tony Bennett. Like he was massively underperforming what was expected of him in the tournament. This was before the 2018 disaster when they lost to a 16 seed as a one. And when you look at that all, I mean, I stopped doing the study because I just felt like it was too small a sample size to really make too much of it. So I stopped doing it. I believe in 2019 when I was telling a lot of people to pick Virginia, like I had a whole section arguing that like let's just not talk about this Tony Bennett thing, right? Like he's a good coach, and the most important thing that year was he had a really really good basketball team, and luckily that ended up working out.
Now, what sort of scenarios with pace do you see in some of these games? Like if Alabama gets matched up with a slow tempo control possessions team, or if Alabama gets matched up with another up tempo team. Do you see that playing a role, or does it kind of even itself out?
I mean, I think these are kind of smaller order effects. You know, in general, like I'm going to trust my main numbers about what I think the point spread in this game is, what I think the win probability for each team is. I'm going to trust that. If, you know, for example, if Alabama's like a 24-point favorite and they, as an up tempo team, are going to play another up tempo team, then you expect more possessions. And then maybe instead of a 24-point favorite, they should be a 25-point favorite, right? Just because you expect more variance with um, sorry, you expect a bigger point spread with higher possession games. So, you know, maybe micro adjustments like that, but I'm not, I mean, I have no interest in betting those big point spread games anyways, because I feel like it depends on when you're going to take your starters out late in the game. So, you know, small adjustments there, but nothing I'm really that I'm going to be really digging into.
I mean, I think on a micro level, looking at alt lines for some of these games where there's huge pace discrepancies and seeing the sports books that kind of treat it like a regular 22-point favorite. Because, you know, the difference, if you have a 22-point favorite and both teams are up tempo, looking at the minus 26 alt line or the plus 16 alt line and seeing how they price it, because those points are worth less than if it's two like slow tempo teams against each other. And you can, you know, I know that all the podcasts say never buy points, but sometimes, occasionally, it might be worth it, or even just line shopping in general, which is good for using Pinnacle Sportsbook for. Um, you know, if you see a bunch of sports books with +3 and you don't have a lean on the game, but you see one sports book with +3.5, where the half a point is only worth an extra 5 cents. Um, for the upcoming NFL draft and football season, what sort of new metrics do you think are going to take place for this year that didn't take place last year?
What new metrics? I don't know. I mean, I've started to think about the draft. I'm not sure any of the metrics are different. I feel like I've always kind of been a fan of wisdom of crowds there, and I feel like I'm going to lean less towards like I guess I'll call it big wisdom of crowds. So the stuff that Benjamin Robinson's doing at Grinding the Mocks, where he's just aggregating every single mock draft you can find. And I think I'm going to kind of emphasize more on the sharp mocks. So the folks that we know have a pretty good track record, people like Daniel Jeremiah at NFL.com. I feel like I'm going to lean a little bit more that way, just because I found him to be particularly accurate. I'm looking forward to betting the NFL draft. I feel like this is something that is not going to last forever because it's just such a hard thing for the books to do well. And then I don't know, heading into the football season, I haven't really thought about that. I mean, I'll take a bunch of time once the tournament starts to start looking at NFL and college football numbers. I think what I do. I think I have a pretty good baseline for those predictions, using things like success rate and kind of filtering out the randomness of explosive plays. Am I going to add anything new? Probably, but I actually don't know what those things are right now.
When do you start typically hitting up those NFL futures, if at all?
Yeah. So I don't do a ton with NFL futures. And the main reason is because I don't really have a database model that I trust to project out win totals. A lot of what I do in the early weeks of the seasons are all market based. So I'm really relying on wisdom of crowds there because I found that to be pretty accurate heading into the season. And that's good, but it's kind of hard to use the market against itself, right? So I usually use kind of the preseason market to project what those week one spreads should be, and 2 and 3. So I don't bet a lot of NFL win totals. I'll do some kind of maybe more qualitative win totals. I think, oh, for example, like 2 years ago, I had like Cleveland under 10.5 wins simply because I didn't think they were that good, and they had like a basically 0 point differential the season before, even though they made a playoff run, beat the Steelers. So very rarely I'll have something like that. Maybe a little bit more this year, as I spend less of my time dealing with code issues in the offseason and more studying up on the teams. But I'm not huge in NFL win totals. Probably a little bit more so college football. I like to kind of dig into those teams, and I do think there's more value there. And there I do have a model that I trust to project out the season where this team is and how many win totals.
Yeah, I mean, most of what I find for NFL futures is, by the time I like work everything through, make sure I'm not missing anything, and I come up with a number, the edge is just not big enough to warrant having my money locked up,
Exactly.
even for 4 months.
Exactly. Yeah. I
I
mean
mean,
yeah, no, that's a huge thing, right? Because if you expect on like an NFL weekend to not have much money in your sports betting accounts, then you should probably not bet any futures at all unless you think you have a huge edge.
I think part of it is people love futures just because it gives them a longer sweat. It's a lot of fun. It's more lucrative.
Right.
So I think there needs to be, something out there for people who bet futures to do it in a way that's sharper.
Right.
Because most of what I see is when running these numbers is you'll have an occasional bet where there's like a small edge, but the vast majority of the bets there's a huge negative edge.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, some of these bets, the edge is worse for you as a bettor than blindly betting SGPs.
Right. Right. For sure.
I mean, if a team is plus, 20,000 and in 25,000 simulations wins only 2 times.
Right. Yeah, that's not good. That's going to be like what?
And I think the sports books get extra greedy. I think the sports books get extra greedy where, um, you may be able to find a plus 200, but they know that people are going to bet it no matter what price they put it at. So they do plus 7,500 or plus 10,000 when it should be plus. And then, the plus number will be like so big, it won't even fit into the column in Excel. I'll have to widen it out.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they do that. I don't know, man. There's some bad teams in the NFL that, like, you know, like there is no way Chicago or, well, actually, let's just make fun of Houston. Houston's not winning the Super Bowl. I know this. We're at a whole league of parity. Houston's not winning the Super Bowl.
So, on that note, do you have any last thoughts for our listeners this week?
Yeah, I think I don't know. I'm excited about a lot of college basketball, both in terms of winning March Madness pools and betting these games once the tournament starts. So yeah, I don't know. Just start following the market. Even if you haven't been betting college basketball, start following the market. See what teams are getting, certain times of market movement. Use that along with my numbers, your numbers, Kevin, Ken Palm, and all that stuff. And yeah, let's go and have some fun with it.
All right, Dr. Feng, Ed Feng, as well as your other hats. Thanks for coming on to 90 Degrees, and I wish all of the listeners success in their March Madness pools or even their March Madness bets.
Big bomb bangers. Boogie down.
Thank you for tuning in to 90 Degrees, presented by the Hammer Betting Network. Head over to our website, thehammer.bet, for all your sports betting needs. If you've enjoyed the show, click the like button. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you've made it this far, drop a comment on who you think will win the March Madness tournament. Let's cash.